Let's begin.
Hello and welcome to Pods Above Replacement, part of the Padres Hot Tub Podcast Network. My name is Raphie Cantor. I am the producer of Padres Hot Tub, and joining me from the Mile High City, he's providing me lineup protection. It's John Precoda!
I don't mean to brag or anything, but I'm only hitting 5.7% worse with runners in scoring position than Austin Nola is. Don't want to brag. Just saying.
We could maybe use you. I don't know. Are you stretching? Are you keeping limber?
I am.
They're playing not far from you today, so they might need you.
I can pinch hit for Austin Nola and provide the same value.
Well, John, we are recording on Sunday morning, June 11th, which means you will be, if you're watching this, if you're a faithful Pods Above Replacement listener, you'll be listening to this the day that we are recording, which is a rarity for us. But we wanted to get some fresh content to you on this weekend as the Padres are wrapping up a series in Colorado. You will know what has happened. We do not. So we wish you well in the future. But before we get into our topic today, which, as you might have guessed from our introduction, is all about lineup and roster construction. It is a much talked about theme in terms of the Padres this year with our quote-unquote stars and scrubs approach and also where our hitters are hitting in the lineup. So we're going to get into all of that. But first, we hope you're watching us on YouTube. As always, slowly more and more people are getting the YouTube Music app. And something I wanted to point out, because a few people texted me after last show, if you download the YouTube Music app and you don't immediately see podcasts, that's okay. It's being gradually rolled out to all users. So check back in every now and then. So it might not immediately be available to you. It actually just became available to me this week. I've had it for a couple weeks. And it's awesome. So if you want to listen to us on YouTube Music, again, it's that awesome feature of getting to put it on in the app, walk around and have the phone in your pocket, and then we start talking about something you want to see, you pull it out, and all of a sudden you're watching it, just like as if you were watching us on YouTube to begin with. Please subscribe. We've had an influx of subscribers in the last few weeks. It's been awesome to see this community grow. We've seen some new folks even join our Patreon too, patreon.com/PadresHotTub, where John and I have a Discord channel that is dedicated just to this show. And we have had some people who come in and have found the show and come to talk to us and the other stat forward folks that are part of our community. So it's been great to meet you all there. And finally, of course, check out some of our other videos. You know, we've been doing, we have play reviews, John, I think for almost everyone on the roster, right?
Get in there. We're getting close.
We're getting there. At least the starters and some key pitchers we have. Player reviews that are meant to be evergreen. They're meant to be content that you could watch at any point in the season, and it would still track. So please check those out. But for now, we are going to be talking about lineup and roster construction. And before we get into anything about the Padres specifically, we wanted to lay a foundation and talk about the basics with you all. So, John, could you please talk about how one would build a lineup in a vacuum?
Of course. So there's a couple caveats in that part of current lineup construction guidelines are that the lineup should be constructed based on kind of a daily pitching matchup version of what's happening overall. So you can't really just say like exactly what your lineup should be every single day for, you know, the whole year, even just against lefties or just against righties. But there is like a prototype, a modern day prototype of what you might want from your lineup construction as a whole. And obviously the number one spot, historically, you think of like a Juan Pierre type, which, you know, Juan Pierre was a star, so he'll work at the number one spot in any era. But in the modern baseball, the speed component tends to be a little bit less important than just getting on base in general. And so that's the position where OBP matters the most. Speed, if they have it, cool. If they don't, that's fine. Number two slot in the lineup, you usually want probably your best hitter, skewed towards having a higher OBP as well. Number 3 hitter tends to be a little bit less important than maybe second or fourth, and sometimes first as well, although there's a little bit of debate on that currently. And the reason why is because the number 3 spot is actually the spot in which you are most likely to come up with 2 outs and nobody on, which is obviously a situation in which you can't create a lot of damage. And then the number 4 hitter is, that's the cleanup hitter, and that still is with modern analytics. It's still a guy that you want to have just a good hitter overall, but instead of skewing a little bit more towards OBP, skewing a little bit more towards slug or putting the ball in play in general. Number 5 is just another good hitter, skewing a little bit more towards slug than OBP. And then number 6 is where you kind of want to flip the lineup over into a worse version of the top portion of your order, wherein you want your number 6 through 9 guys to be set up in a manner that mirrors the top of the lineup, just a worse group of hitters. So your 6th spot is kind of the second leadoff hitter, or like I said, the worst player. So he'll have the higher OBP overall and maybe a little bit more speed. And that's important because it's less of a negative when somebody gets thrown out from the 6th slot when they're trying to steal, because the run expectancy is just lower at the bottom of the order in general. And those hitters tend to have less power overall. So a single can drive you home when you steal second. So then number 7 is just the next best hitter, 8 the next best hitter, and then 9 is usually your worst hitter. So that's kind of the modern day manner in which we look at a lineup. However, like I say, it's very variable. Not every team has exactly these archetypes that situationally will line up with this kind of like prototypical lineup. And not only that, but you should probably be changing it based on your opponent that day.
Yeah, and going back to the 2-hitter spot, which you talked about being the best hitter on the team, that is something that is a relatively recent thing in the modern game, where it's kind of become much more widely recognized that you want to have your best overall hitter in the 2 spot as opposed to, say, the 3 or 4 spot. And the reason for that is simply that the 2-hitter almost always gets the same number of plate appearances as the leadoff hitter. And you want to have your best hitter getting the most amount of plate appearances in general. So, if you just think about it in that sense, it makes a lot of sense. Now, traditionally, when I was growing up, when I was playing MVP baseball 2004 and 2005 and trading for to have Babe Ruth and all these other, ridiculous legends of the game, and Adrian Gonzalez, like, just because why not, it was like, I guess that would have been a little bit later on, but still. The thing that I traditionally was taught was that you have a fast guy in leadoff, you have a singles guy in second, and then your thumpers are 3rd and 4th in the lineup. And this is like one of those interesting nexus points where the traditional game and the modern game, like basically modern data, kind of backs up some things that were traditionally thought of. So the modern lineup, there's an article by Fangraphs by this guy named Chris Russo, not Mad Dog Chris Russo, definitely not him, different guy, where he basically wanted to explore this question of, like, is it better to put your best hitter second or to put a singles hitter second and then move your best hitters to the 3 and 4 spot? And basically ran a simulation 100,000 times with a lineup that, reflected this, and basically found that the modern lineup scores 4.283 runs a game, and the traditional lineup scores 4.279 runs a game. So the modern lineup is better, but it's by 0.004 runs in a vacuum, which of course you still want that advantage. Like, you've always want to, if something says something's better, like, you just do the better thing. But it is very, very, very close. The part of the article that I really appreciated, that in terms of it spelling out run expectancy per game, is basically what happens if you set a terrible lineup? What happens if you have no regard for, like, you put your 2-hitter in the 7 spot and you put your slugger in the, in the 9 spot, and then you put your 5th hitter lead off and like all that stuff. Like, what would happen if you just randomly did it? And basically that lineup generates 4.122 runs per game. Now, that doesn't sound like it's a huge difference, but if you put that over a 162 game season, that's 26 runs over the course of the year, which is basically 2.5 to 3 wins depending on the year. So that goes to show you that setting your lineup, in terms of order is important. It's like, on the one hand, it's somehow like less than I thought it would be. It's, just because it seems so sacrilegious to put like Juan Soto in the 8th spot and to think that it would only cost you like necessarily 3 wins a year, but still 3 wins is a lot. But what the article also hammers home is that the emphasis should not be placed on batting the same player in the same spot every day. For instance, like I just said, batting Juan Soto in the 2 spot every single day. It's actually more important to put the optimal hitter-pitcher matchups out there. And we really saw that a few years ago with the Tampa Bay Rays, where they started using insane platoons all the time, where it's like, really leaning into the righty-lefty matchup stuff. And an example of this was during the 2020 World Series, they had been hitting Mike Brusso in the 3 spot, which I think is already like, whoa, okay, Mike Brusso in the 3 spot, interesting. And then in the, I want to say like the 5th or 6th inning of the game, they pinch hitted G-Man Choi for Mike Brusso, which was notable because 3 hitters almost never get pinch hit for that early in the game. It's like maybe at the very end of the game, if there's a specific matchup that you're trying to get, but because your 3 hitter is almost always one of your best hitters, so why would you ever pitch hit for them? But the Rays were a huge subscriber to this philosophy of the idea of like, you always optimize the pitcher hitter matchups, and some of the modern stats are starting to bear that out. It obviously leads to some of that criticism that you can see from some folks where it's like, oh, you're managing the game from a spreadsheet. And, oh, Dave Roberts is coming and pulling this guy out at a certain time in the game and blah, 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 blah. But just in terms of wanting to set the groundwork of like where the kind of data and modern analytics says you should be leaning towards, that's kind of our foundation. So with that in mind, John, let's take a look at what the Padres are currently putting out in terms of lineup.
Yeah, the Padres are kind of following that model wherein they don't keep the same exact lineup every single game. In fact, the lineup that we've used the most time is only 3 times, and that was like a versus left-handed pitchers lineup pre-Tatis, so just stacking mostly right-handed batters. But since Tatis has come back, we do have like a prototypical lineup kind of that we've used the most often, and that tends to be Tatis in the 1st spot, depending on left versus right, Machado in the 2nd, and Soto in the 3rd, or vice versa. Bogarts has been the most often used in the 4 slot, and then the 5 and 6 have been a Cronenworth, Carpenter, or vice versa, and then Cruz, when he's in, has been in those 2 spots as well. And then Kim in the 7th spot, Grisham in the 8th, and Nola in the 9th, or whichever catcher is there that day has been in the 9th, just a lot overall. So that's kind of been the lineup, kind of typically like Tatis, Machado, Soto, Bogarts, Cronenworth, Carpenter, Kim, Grisham, Nola. But as you said, it is important to change based on your matchup, and we have done that, although I wouldn't say like a ton. We made small little modifications from kind of the prototypical lineup, depending on the pitcher, but for the most part, it's been consistently similar, if not the same. And so let's talk about that. Let's just talk about lineup construction overall and how it's kind of played out for us. Obviously, much has been said about us having a stars and scrubs lineup, and that's not saying that the bottom of the order is a bunch of scrubs, but they get paid lower than our stars, right? They're not the 4 guys up top. And a question that we've just had overall is, what's the viability of this kind of stars and scrubs lineup? And you'll talk about that in more depth later, but kind of the problem then, or at least suggested by the question, is that the bottom of the order is kind of tanking everything and making it such that these top 4 don't get to show how good they are because, you can just get to the bottom of the lineup and get everybody out. And that's kind of that like Cronenworth, Carpenter, Kim, Grisham, Nola problem, like towards the bottom of the order. Except for Nola, who this year has been incredibly bad. It's not a group of terrible, terrible hitters. Like we've seen much worse in terms of Padres history, right? But it was interesting to me to find what I would conceptualize as a bottom of the lineup redundancy. I think that the bottom of the lineup has similar batting profiles and might be contributing to less success overall. And the reason why I say that is because the bottom of the lineup tends to generate their value primarily from taking walks and not really being attack-minded at the plate. In fact, we only really have 2 players historically that create most of their damage over the heart of the plate. Those are the players that are looking to attack a pitch, and when they attack it, they'll do damage. And those are Fernando Tatis Jr. and Manny Machado. And it's fine to generate value in whatever manner you want to generate value. Generating walks, we've said it a million times on this podcast, generating walks are super valuable. So you could say, yeah, Juan Soto doesn't generate a ton of value over the heart of the plate, but his walk percentage is so dang high that he's getting on base a lot and therefore creating a lot of overall run value, which is great, especially when he's like lined up around Tatis and Machado and Bogarts, guys that, you know, can put the ball in play and create damage. He's just a great fit for the lineup. And, you know, Cronenworth at second base, he's a good second baseman, or at least a good hitting second baseman. He hits about league average or above, which is good for a second baseman. Ha-Seong Kim, same thing. Austin Nola, terrible this year, but historically has been, you know, whatever, okay. Not generating value over the heart of the plate, that's for sure. But he'll take a walk once in a while. Grisham's the same. So now you're getting to the bottom of the lineup, and it's like the same guy kind of, at least in terms of archetype, is basically the 6 through 9 spot. And obviously we've had a ton of like runners in scoring position difficulties this year, but when you have nobody at the bottom of the lineup that's actually creating value over the heart of the plate, it's not surprising to me that our team is not driving in runners when they're kind of going up there with this kind of like passive approach and not necessarily generating any batted ball value towards the bottom of the lineup. So if you get to Carpenter and he's looking to kind of draw a walk, or, you know, he's not going to put the ball in play frequently, then you can say, okay, I'm either going to give you a pitcher's pitch or move on to the next guy. And if he takes a walk, guess what? Carpenter has a very similar approach to like Cronenworth or Kim or Grisham. And I'm going to explain why I think that this is maybe a bigger problem than we've kind of discussed in the past a little bit later in the episode. But I do want to just point out right now that there is redundancy at the bottom of the lineup wherein everybody's kind of passive, kind of trying to draw a walk, not really looking to hit the ball over the plate. We only really have 2 hitters that do that. Those are Manny Machado and Fernando Tatis Jr. And when you compare that to our rivals, the Dodgers, they tend to have almost a split lineup wherein like half their order are folks that are good over the heart of the plate and half of them are folks that prefer to draw a walk. And that kind of balance makes it so that a lineup can be successful because there'll be people getting on, there'll be people driving them in, people getting on, people driving them in. Whereas we are seemingly focused on driving folks in only at the top of our lineup and trying to get on base only at the bottom of the lineup with no consistency throughout.
Yeah. And I think just like specifically looking at that, those heart of the plate numbers from a career standpoint, you know, Manny Machado generating 66.1 runs in the heart of the plate over the course of his career, and this year having a negative run value in the heart of the plate, like really shows you kind of what this lineup is missing. And especially in terms of the place that he occupies in our lineup, where he's coming up behind Tatis and Soto every time, where he's likely to have men on base and therefore likely to get pitches to hit. It really, I think, hammers home why Manny is such a linchpin of this lineup and why I think that the team is going to live and die by Manny, you know, and whether or not he's hitting. So with that in mind, I wanted to kind of narrow down on a specific part of our offensive game, which is two-strike approach. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this is specifically because this week, when we recorded this episode, there was a game that the Padres played against the Seattle Mariners in San Diego, in which they put up 10 runs and they looked fantastic offensively. But the thing that I think everyone, certainly on the Padres Hot Tub Discord, noticed, and some people on Padres Twitter noticed, was that they were hitting the ball the other way. And in a way, you know, like Soto was doing it, Cronenworth was doing it, in a way that like it's almost like because we hadn't been seeing it at all this year, it stuck out. And so I wanted to just kind of like dig into two-strike approach and see how the Padres were doing with two strikes. And this is not runners in scoring position. This is not like all I'm just looking at is like with 2 strikes, how are the Padres doing? And John, the answer is not good. The answer is actually pretty effing terrible, if we're being honest. So first on the screen, I'm going to put up what the Padres team numbers are overall with 2 strikes. This is everyone on the Padres, and I'm going to compare it to everyone in Major League Baseball so that we are dealing with huge sample sizes here. At first blush, it's not a huge difference, but when you consider the size of the sample, you start to see that the differences are pretty stark. Some things I want to point out. Our K rate is basically league average. It's a little bit worse. We're 42.9% K rate with 2 strikes, which is what you would expect because, you already got 2 strikes on you, you're going to strike out a lot. The league average K rate is 42.5%. So, obviously over a big sample, that 0.4% difference is going to make a difference, but not a huge difference. Walk rate, big difference. We walk 10% of the time with 2 strikes on us. The league walks 8.5% of the time. That's something we've talked about constantly. This is a team that's looking for walks, and they get them, and they do well at them. This is where some of the bigger differences are, though. Batting average, the league is hitting 170 with 2 strikes. We're hitting 153. So again, on that big sample, that's where things start to really separate. And in terms of slugging, for instance, the league is slugging 268, and we are slugging 242. So the thing that I find interesting is that our WOBA versus expected WOBA. You could claim that this team is sort of unlucky, given the fact that our expected WOBA with 2 strikes is 235 and the league's is 237. So we're really not behind league average that much. Whereas league WOBA is 235 and our WOBA is 225. So we have a 10-point difference, whereas the league only has a 2-point difference. But I think as we start to get a little bit more granular here, some of the differences are a little bit more clear. So in terms of run value, and this is something that we've talked about a lot on the show, we were just talking about it with Heart of the Plate, but basically StatCast generates run value above or below average for a given situation. And basically, it's a way to compare overall production. It's similar in a way that WOBA and xWOBA try and take into account like all aspects of the game and say, okay, a single is not worth the same as a walk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Run value just looks at kind of overall, just general production, and a negative run value just means it's negative, it's below average, and a positive just means it's above average. And an important thing to remember, of course, is that somewhere between 9 and 10 runs is usually how much a win is worth in Major League Baseball in a given year. That number fluctuates, but just kind of keep that in mind. So in terms of how the team is generating value overall with 2 strikes, we are the 3rd worst in baseball, behind only the Detroit Tigers and the Minnesota Twins. We have a negative 23.4 run value with 2 strikes. And I wanted to contrast that with the leaders in baseball. And I'm going to be talking about the Texas Rangers a lot in this segment.
Yeah.
They're such an outlier. It's almost shocking. And to the point where I think obviously a lot of this is just there's going to be natural regression. Like it's just they've performed so well this season, and especially so well with 2 strikes. And you don't have to look any further than the run value that is generated, where they are leading the league in terms of production with 2 strikes with 62.3 runs above average. The next closest team is the Dodgers, who have 20. Okay. And then it's like 20, 20, 17, 13, 13. And the Rangers are all the way up here with 62. So I'm going to keep throwing out the Rangers numbers and just to say it, like, but I'm mostly going to be referencing the Dodgers because they tend to be the second best in these categories, and they're much closer to the rest of the league. And they're also obviously our division rival and a benchmark for us as a team. So we should be looking at them. But every time I go to the Rangers, I'll just be like, wow. Okay. Just keep that in mind. Okay. So, like I said, with 2 strikes, we are generating 23.4 runs below average. The Dodgers are generating 20.3 runs above average. The Diamondbacks are generating 20.1 runs above average. And then you have the Rays and the Braves and the Orioles and the Yankees and the teams that you would expect to be performing well because these are good teams. And so again, it's our WOBA is 225 with 2 strikes, and the Dodgers and the D-backs have a 256 WOBA. So again, over the sample of an entire year, that 31-point difference really starts to make a difference. And then I wanted to get a little bit more, granular and talk about approach and specifically batted ball direction. Because traditionally, when I, was getting coached as a youngster, when you think about 2 strikes, that's your time to choke up. That's the time to pitch the ball or to hit the ball where it is pitched, and, let the ball travel a little bit more, maybe take it the opposite way. But basically try to stay alive, try and make contact. So one of the things that I found to be interesting is that the Padres are pulling the ball at a league average rate with 2 strikes, but they're generating the lowest overall run value when they pull the ball with 2 strikes. So I don't necessarily know that it's that they're trying to pull the ball an insane amount. It's just that when they do, they're actually not that good at it. Our expected WOBA on pulled balls with 2 strikes is 363, whereas the Dodgers are at a 412 clip. So when you think about in terms of approach, what's going in your mind when you're stepping in the box? It's just kind of remarkable to me to see that the Padres, even when they are quote unquote successful in what they're trying to do of like pull the ball to generate value, they're actually not successful. The thing that really struck me though when I was looking at these numbers is balls that go the opposite way with 2 strikes, which again I was just pointing out in terms of like that's kind of traditionally when you might think to hit the ball the opposite way. And you wouldn't probably be that surprised to learn that the Padres are the 3rd lowest in terms of opposite hit percentage with 2 strikes. They, of all batted balls, they have 22.6% of their batted balls with 2 strikes go the opposite way. But the thing that's interesting about that is that the other good teams also do not hit the ball the opposite way that frequently with 2 strikes. The lowest is the Rays with 20.8%. The next lowest is the Diamondbacks with 22.1%. And then the Padres. And then the Rangers, who, like we said, are this crazy outlier, have the 4th lowest opposite hit percentage with 23.7. And then the Atlanta Braves have the 5th lowest. So those are all the best teams in baseball right now. We are right there among them in terms of what our opposite hit percentage with 2 strikes is. But the results are so insanely, dramatically different. Our generated run value on balls hit the opposite way is 6.2 runs below average. The Rangers have 24 runs above average. And this is where it starts to get interesting. The Rockies have 21.8 runs above average because they hit the ball the opposite way a ton when they're down to 2 strikes. And then you have the Red Sox 19.4, the Cubs with 19, the Phillies with 15.9, the Dodgers with 11.1, the Braves with 8.3. So again, we are generating below average run value on balls hit the opposite way, whereas these other teams are generating positive run value. And the biggest gulf you can see is in batting average. So on balls hit the opposite way with 2 strikes, we are hitting 217 as a team. Okay. The next lowest team, the next worst team in terms of batting average is the Yankees. Okay. And they're hitting 257. So it's a 40-point difference between us, the worst team in terms of batting average on balls hit the opposite way with 2 strikes, and then the Yankees. And then, like I said, the Yankees are 257, and then it's 258, 268, 274, 282, 3, 4, 5, 6 point differences between the next teams. Now, the best teams hitting the ball the opposite way, the Rangers, like I said, huge outlier. They're hitting 404 on balls hit the opposite way with 2 strikes. But like I said, some of the other teams that really hit the ball the opposite way, the Cubs are hitting 381. The Rockies are hitting 372. The Pirates are hitting 350. But then now we start to get into some of the better teams. The Braves are hitting 333. The Dodgers are hitting 321. The Rays are hitting 313. And we are hitting 217 in terms of batting average on balls going the opposite way. So to me, what that shows me is a lack of acceptance, like in general, in terms of like having a different approach when you're going up there with 2 strikes, and also being, having in your mind, like saying, hey, like if this ball is pitched to me outside, I am just going to try and gently, deal it to the opposite direction. And instead of trying to, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like kind of play hero ball and really just try and like pull and hit and crush balls, we're not doing it. It's not working. So I want to do an update on this in a couple months and just see if things start to change, because obviously we've had through April and May an exceptionally bad offensive performance from this team that you wouldn't expect it. There might be some regression that is coming. But a lot of this performance lies with our stars, John. And I know you've dug a little bit more into their performances thus far this year.
Yeah, and just breaking that down just a little bit, I'm trying to find like what are the reasons for this. Because it seems like, all right, we're making poor contact with 2 outs, and whether it's pull the opposite way. I mean, yeah, with 2 strikes, and whether it's pull the opposite way no matter what. And that doesn't make sense to me overall, because as a team, our like ex-Wubba our like batted balls overall have just not been good. Mm-hmm. And as I just talked about before, most of our players don't create a lot of value over the heart of the plate. And one of the main players that creates a lot of value over the heart of the plate is Manny Machado, who's been terrible this year. So it's like, who is the guy that's going to come up and just, have a good 2-strike approach, and if he does want to pull it, smash it. Who? It's like Tatis, and that's basically it to me. And then do we also have a good opposite way approach? Seems to me that it's like most of the time when we do go the opposite way, we're getting beat by something, like, and you'll see like a blooper by Cronenworth or something like that. Grisham gets beat, and it's we're hitting it the other way, but not with authority. And these numbers kind of bear that out. It's like our X will go the other way, terrible. So like whether our approach is something or not, it certainly isn't. We're not driving it with authority the other way. So you could say that maybe that is a possible thing that we could do, is like actually take the ball where it's hit and not just go the other way because you got beat on a fastball. But going over those top 4, I mean, I'm going to go over the top 4 and then kind of the lineup in general. And I don't think that the top 4 is super exciting to talk about. They're 4 really good hitters, and barring poor health, they're going to create value overall. And there is a little bit of a question on where to put each of them in their little, slots in the top 4. I would argue that, so like I said before, the number 3 spot is the spot in which you're most likely to come up with 2 outs and nobody on. And to me, that's a great spot for Soto, who can take a walk before the number 4 hitter comes up. And Tatis, there's been a lot of debate about him leadoff versus cleanup. The profile fits that he is a guy that hits the ball with authority and therefore might be a good cleanup hitter. And you would be ensuring, if he was the cleanup hitter, that either one of 2 things happens. Either he comes up in the first inning with somebody on, which is obviously great because he's one of the guys that actually hits the ball with authority. Or if everybody gets out in the first inning, he's now the leadoff man for the second inning, which is a role that he could play. So, I mean, I don't really have a lot of chips in this little debate. The top 4, I think they're going to produce in some manner or another in any way that you jumble them up. But it's the bottom of the order that I'm a little bit more concerned about, at least so far this year. And I was talking about kind of the redundancy problem, and I think a lot of this stems overall from having basically 2 second basemen at second base and first base. And just kind of our how we have kind of middle infielders overall in a lot of our lineup. And a lot of them are good hitters, so it's fine, but the redundancy, the like prototype of the player seems to be a little bit much, especially at the bottom of the order. So I know that we're a stathead podcast and we're not going to be talking about batting average very much, but I do want to just bring up something that I made up myself, which is like not batting average in terms of hits per plate or per at bat, but rather hits per plate appearance, which just suggests that like, okay, when somebody comes to the plate, what's the chance that they get a hit in that at bat? And there are certain players on our team that are very likely to get a hit anytime that they come to the plate, and they're maybe going up to the plate with the intention to get a hit rather than walk. And once again, it's the same players that also do damage over the heart of the plate. That's not surprising. Tatis and Machado over the past 2 years, and Tatis over his career has had the same exact percentage of time that they get a hit per plate appearance, which is about 258. So over 25% of the time that they come to the plate, a hit happens. And it's the same thing with Bogarts. He, the last couple years, has been at 259. Soto obviously is not the kind of player, despite having a good batting average overall, he gets so many walks that chances that he gets a hit in any one plate appearance is only about 200 overall the last couple years. And then everybody at the bottom of the order has, like I said, kind of a passive approach and has about a 20% or lower chance of getting a hit in a given at bat, which a league average would be about 22% of the time. And obviously our good players are 25% or higher. So get to the bottom of our lineup and you have Carpenter, Cronenworth, Kim, Grisham, Nola, and each of them has a less than 20%, sometimes as low as 15.9% for Grisham, chance of getting a hit in that given plate appearance. And the thing about scoring runs, fun fact, is that most of the time they're scored off a hit. Somebody actually has to get a hit. And when you have a whole lineup of people that are like 15%, 17%, 19% chance of actually getting a hit in that plate appearance, then you can pass the baton. And what that sets up is for high scoring innings. Because once you pass the baton, when somebody actually gets the hit, that's 2 runs, that's 3 runs, that's, a big inning. But if you have the bases loaded and, nobody gets a hit, then you have a lot of runners left in scoring position, which is a thing that the Padres have a lot of so far this year. And my argument isn't that these aren't good hitters. I'm saying that per the quality of the hitter, we need another hitter that is willing to attack the baseball and create similar quality at the plate, but with a different archetype of batting approach. And they don't have to be good hitters. Like Brandon Drury, for example, I don't think anybody would argue he's a much better hitter than Jake Cronenworth overall, but he is somebody who comes to the plate looking to hit and gets a hit about 24% of the time he comes up. That's not batting average. That's hits per times that he comes up, per plate appearance. And, Hunter Renfroe in the past, we've seen him. He's a guy that tries to attack the ball, 23%. Josh Naylor was 24%. Ty France, almost 25%. Like, if you had this kind of, and by the way, these are mostly like first base type, corner outfielder type players. If you have one of those guys hitting in, say, like the 7th spot, the 8th spot, while these players are like accumulating on the bases, then there's somebody that's like a second cleanup hitter towards the bottom of the order that's actually going to put the ball in play and like has a good chance to get an actual hit. And I think that that little redundancy problem wherein the approach is so similar towards the bottom of the plate, mixed with the fact that Austin Nola has had so many plate appearances while being historically bad, has just made it so that the bottom of our order is just so weak whenever there's like a chance to score runs. We just never take advantage of it. And just to put some fun numbers to the Austin Nola futility, I mean, the futility is just there overall. He's hitting 135, 256, 180 overall for his slash line this year. But we brought up kind of how often he comes up with runners in scoring position. And it's now up to 34% of the time that he comes up with runners in scoring position. And his slash line with runners in scoring position, I said that I was 5.7% worse at getting a hit with runners in scoring position than Austin Nola. And that's because he gets a hit 5.7% of the time. He has a 0.57 average with runners in scoring position, 233 on base, and then a 0.57 slugging, which means that they've all been singles when he actually has got a hit, and he's got a hit 5.7% of the time, despite coming up 34% of the time with runners in scoring position, which is twice as much in terms of percentage as like Soto, who comes up about 17% of the time with runners in scoring position, and he never gets a hit. So now you're funneling all these walks down to a guy that every pitcher knows they can get him out, and they have successfully, frequently.
Yeah. You also this year have 2 more catcher framing runs than Austin Nola. So congratulations on that. So really, really interesting stuff, John. I really appreciate you pulling those stats, and specifically the hits per plate appearance thing is something that I think in our modern game we don't necessarily talk about that much, because like we have other stats for, plate appearances, we have on base percentage, like at bats we have hits, but just like kind of like breaking down like when you are actually hitting the ball every time you come up is super useful. So thank you for crunching those numbers.
I just want to bring up one thing is that we all like Jorge Alfaro last year was not a good hitter. He wasn't. And he's not a good catcher overall. But he drew a lot of love from the fan base because he did something that the rest of the lineup didn't do towards the bottom of the lineup. And that was he came up to hit. He had a hit 23% of the time that he came up to the plate. And that's why he had all those walk-offs, because he was the guy that was actually getting the hit when other people lined up on the bases, you know? And so Jorge Alfaro is not even good. He's not a good hitter, but he's a guy that puts the ball in play. And like, you need one of those at the bottom of the lineup. I would put that out. And for example, the Dodgers, they have those guys stacked throughout the lineup, and we just don't.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of wrap up our discussion with an article that was written in 2021 by Justin Dunbar for Fangraphs, which basically investigates what is the quote-unquote best way to build a roster, either the stars and scrubs approach, as we've detailed, or a depth approach. And this is, I think, where you can start to feel the arguments about AJ Preller and his philosophy in terms of roster construction really come to the surface, because I think there are some people who feel very strongly about depth and like, oh, the Padres traded away all their depth and blah, blah, blah. And there are other people that are like, but we got all these stars and like, this is the plan. And like, what else do you have build depth for in a farm system, if not to upgrade at some point, etc. So with that in mind, this article, again, from 2021, sought to investigate this. And there were some conclusions that were drawn. The first is that basically the stars and scrubs approach, as we know it, as the Padres are executing, is a viable way to win games. That being said, it is subject to a higher range of outcomes, which I think this year bears out, where we're like, how are we beating the snot out of some teams one day and then just absolutely tanking the next day? How are we, at this point in the season below 500, even though, we have all these guys on our team, et cetera, et cetera. And, for reasons that are kind of apparent and we've discussed already on this episode, is that if your stars don't perform, there's no one behind them to kind of come and save them. Whereas, teams with depth, they might have some guys in the 6, 7, 8, 9 spots who could theoretically come in and provide some production. That is not so with us. That being said, this article specifically references the 2018 Boston Red Sox and calls their roster a quote-unquote depth of stars, which I thought was like a nice having it both ways. And basically, the argument that this article made is that the Red Sox in 2018 had 4 players who had 20 offensive runs above average, which basically means they had over 2 wins of value just in terms of their offense alone, in Mookie Betts, JD Martinez, Xander Bogaerts, and Andrew Benintendi. And this is, I'm now reading directly from the article, quote, although the end of their lineup was lacking, they had enough depth of quality hitters at the front to make up for it. We're always looking for binary answers, yet it appears to be that when it comes to lineup construction, the main contributions come from the first 4 to 5 hitters. If they are of enough quality, then the back end of the lineup doesn't have to be sound. Does that sound familiar, John? It's certainly the approach that the Padres are trying to use. And when I talked about that benchmark, 20 offensive runs above average, and they had 4 players who did that. Our top 4 that who would ostensibly be doing this: Xander Bogaerts, Manny Machado, Fernando Tatis Jr., and Juan Soto. Over the course of their career, they average 20 offensive runs above average over 162 game seasons for like the last 5 seasons. You know what I mean? Like, so when I think about like what AJ Preller's drawing on the whiteboard in the executive office, I think that like there's a somewhat defensible argument there of being like, if these guys are just themselves, this is going to be enough. And so I wanted to point that out because I thought that was interesting and a kind of a good one-for-one comparison. It does also say that in terms of pitching, quantity over quality is the optimal structure. And what it defines as quantity is the number of 2 WAR pitchers, and specifically says when you get into the 3 2+ WAR pitchers, so 3 pitchers who are who have 2+ WAR generated over the course of a season individually, that's kind of the optimal spot. And again, you can see that that's kind of what the Padres have in mind. This is as opposed to having like an ace, like kind of like what the Diamondbacks have right now, where it's like we've got Zach Gallen and then we're figuring out the rest. You know what I mean? And actually, it says that quantity in terms of 2+ WAR pitchers is better than quality in that sense. And when you look at how this was drawn up, Darvish, Snell, Musgrove are 2+ WAR guys. Walker's sneaking in there, you know what I mean, and kind of soaking up some of the fact that Snell isn't really providing that much value, and Musgrove had a slow start and like whatever. But that's what we have in mind. And finally, in terms of bullpen construction, it says that relievers actually tend to have minimal effect on a game, and having a closer who's like of incredibly high caliber isn't super correlated to overall wins. And basically the subheader of the article is don't pay for relievers. So as we think about Josh Hader going forward, that's something to keep in mind. And then finally, I'm going to throw up an image on the screen right now. Basically, it wanted to look at the relationship between expected wins and these certain aspects of roster construction. And as you can see, the number one correlation between expected wins and roster construction is the number of 4 WAR hitters. Basically, the R-squared on that is 0.413, which is the highest of all of these. It's more than the number of 2 WAR hitters. It's more than the number of 4 WAR pitchers. It's more than the number of 2 WAR pitchers. Like everything. It's the number of 4 WAR hitters you have as the highest correlation to expected wins out of all of these categories. And again, I think you can see what AJ Preller had in mind here, which is that if our top 4 guys are just themselves, we can expect to win a lot of games. So with that in mind, I wanted to wrap up that discussion before handing it back over to you, John, with a quote that kind of rounds out the article, and it's a good way to kind of think about this. Quote, "A lineup appears to be as good as its 4th or 5th best hitter. A rotation is as good as its 3rd or 4th best pitcher, and a bullpen is as good as its overall depth. These are the roster building principles that I, the author, would go by. A quote-unquote stars and scrubs approach may let you have more flashy talent, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that you'll win games. Consequently, teams need to be responsible and make sure they build their organization with the proper foundation of players before quote-unquote star chasing. This is why teams need to go through rebuilds." And again, this article was written in March of 2021. "It is precisely why the Padres are on the verge of joining teams who can win consistently, while the Phillies and Angels have failed to make the postseason in recent years." Now I am end quoting. So, John, given all this information, how do you feel about the way that AJ Preller has constructed this roster? Is it something that you can see what he was going for and it just hasn't panned out? Or do you think that he's inherently built weaknesses that are so glaring that it maybe questions his overall team philosophy?
I do wonder whether he had a plan in terms of, like, if you're building a basketball team, you don't just grab the 5 best basketball players. You need 5 basketball players who suit each other well. And to be honest, the top 4 do like parlay well off of one another. There's folks that get most of their runs based on controlling the strike zone. There's folks that are more power hitters. There's more contact players. Those top 4 make sense. However, how the rest of the roster was built, it does make it so that there are certain folks who are more critical to our success. If they are performing poorly, we have very little chance of scoring runs consistently. It's like we have no backup point guard. And right now, Manny Machado and Tatis are guys who are looking to drive the ball, and they create a lot of damage at the plate. And, Tatis was gone for a long time, and Manny Machado just never performed. And so it's like, who was the guy that's going to be driving in the runs? And it seems like we don't have anybody that's, been willing to come up to the plate and look to hit. And so I do wonder whether, he made a couple mistakes. It seems like he has an organizational thought, just collect good players, and he has a preference towards the middle of the diamond players. But he does kind of fall off on certain archetypes, and having an archetypical first baseman I mean, that's probably why it's entered our subconscious overall. It's because they do provide value based on like an archetypical second baseman, where that archetypical second baseman gets on base a lot and like willing to get a single and maybe steal. But you need somebody who is kind of like the power hitter. And like we have Cronenworth and Kim doing the same thing, but both of them are great, second basemen, but you put one in first base and suddenly you don't have the bopper or just a guy looking to like actually put the ball in play, get a hit. So I understand the building, but it does feel like there might be a difference between constructing resources and kind of like carving out the pietà, like you can gather all the marble you want, but is AJ Preller the guy that's like actually going to sit down and create the, beautiful artwork that's needed to be successful? And I don't know. It does seem like it seems like he learns every year, but it does seem like he never is quite there in terms of finishing like the completed product of a roster.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, on the Padres Hot Tub episode that aired last week when we were recording this, I was like really in a mood and I was like really critical of AJ Preller. And I was like, we're never going to win anything if he's general manager. And I think reading this article, I'll be honest, it's definitely, and doing more research into this, it's definitely softened my position a little bit, and I can see what he was going for. I definitely think how you feel about AJ Preller and the way the Padres are constructed tends to correlate with how you are as a person and how you feel about risk. Because I am naturally an incredibly risk-averse person. And so this strategy definitely feels like the eggs in one basket strategy. And I can see what he was going for, but also because we have no depth organizationally, especially from a starting pitching standpoint, and in terms of, now that we've made the Soto trade, and of course, like you make that trade 1,000 times out of 1,000, and I'm getting really sick of seeing people talking about James Wood. Because like James Wood might be Juan Soto, he might be Aaron Judge, but there's also a really good chance that he's not. And a Juan Soto in the hand is worth 2 James Woods in the bush. You know what I mean? So
that's the common saying. Everybody always says that.
Everyone says that. Yes, so many people have been saying this for a long time. So I think I have a bit of a newfound respect for what AJ was going for, and with that in mind, John, is there anything you want to add before we wrap up this shindig?
Yeah, let's trade for one guy that we can put in the bottom of the order and is looking to hit a baseball over the heart of the plate.
The Padres need a real first baseman. All right,
we just do. Or move Tatis to the center field and get a bat first right fielder to at least like put into the lineup at times.
Yeah,
but yeah, we need that guy. We need one of those guys, a guy looking to hit.
This team is so close to its final form. It's crazy. So hopefully we string together some wins so that we can once again be buyers at the deadline, and we can enter the climactic months of the season with a more complete roster. So with that in mind, thank you once again for listening to Pods Above Replacement. We really appreciate the interaction that we've had with you all online. Some of you have been leaving us some very lovely comments, and those really do help other people find the show. So please, if you like what you're saying, if you hate us, if you say, Raphie, those are some stupid glasses you're wearing, just comment it. It's okay. It all goes to the algorithm and helps us out. And, of course, join our Patreon, patreon.com/Padres Hot Tub. And most importantly, subscribe. John, we're nearing 600 subscribers as I utter these words, which is so exciting, because I was doing some research, by the way. Usually it takes a YouTube channel like 15 months to get to 1,000 subscribers, and we've been active for about 3 months, and we're already over halfway there. So it's just amazing to see how you guys have helped us out as a community, and we hope to continue to grow, and we hope you will help us, find other members who are looking for this kind of content, because we offer a very specific flavor of Padres content, and the biggest thing is just getting it to people. So we thank you once again for helping in that. This has been Pods Above Replacement. We will be putting up a poll this week to try and determine what our next episode will be, so look out for that, and we will see you all next time